Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Israel and Iran, and about how far Israel will let Iran go before striking Iranian nuclear sites. Make no mistake, Israel will not permit Iran to have a nuclear bomb. That is a certainty. It is an axiom. Equally certain is that Iran wants a bomb. Iran very badly wants that nuclear bomb. And while either side of the spectrum, Iran, like Israel, is working very hard to achieve their goal. Iran is working to enrich, develop, procure all the constituent elements necessary to construct a nuclear weapon. Over the past 7 years, the lines in the sand have moved, and they've blurred. The world has changed. It is not the same world we lived in when the first nuclear deal was configured and signed in 2015. During those famous, now infamous, nuke deal negotiations, Iran had only very limited ability to build a bomb. And that was why the agreement contained these sunset clauses. Why it seemed harmless to include sunset clauses. The philosophy behind the sunset clauses was that, over time, limitations on Iran's nuclear development would fade away. Why? Because over time, it was believed that Iran would take its place as an upstanding member of the world community, that Iran would no longer be a threat to other nations because of the great benefits it would gain from participating in the world's economy, that Iran would reap those great profits with the generous assistance of the United States and her economic muscle. Obviously, something went wrong. Some would venture to say that everything went wrong. From the very outset, Iran did not comply. The blame, however, does not fall entirely on Iran. Over time, the world has also changed. It changed its approach to Iran's nuclear aspirations. The lines in the sand were blurred. And as a result, Iran understood what was happening, and the Iranian leadership took advantage of the situation, of the changing of those lines and the blurring of those lines. And why not? After all, world leadership, including and even championed by the United States, seemed committed to coming to a resolution with Iran regardless of the risks. Israel, too, while not in step with the rest of the Western world, changed their lines in the sand vis-a-vis Iran. While Israel once fought hard to prevent any Iranian nuclear development, especially enrichment, not so long ago, however, the point of no return for Israel was Iran's enrichment of fissile material. Then the line changed again, this time to how much nuclear fuel and at what level of purity that fuel was. And again, this time, the question became not does Iran have enriched uranium, but how much uranium does it have, and how high? Is it enough to make a bomb? And is there enough there to create a significant weapon? And how many weapons can be created by Iran? Israel saw how the world was changing and realized the importance, the necessity of adjusting her goals on Iran's nuclear development. Now, today, in 2022, Israel's objective is to slow down the process of Iranian nuclear development. Jerusalem has no delusions about Iran ever becoming a productive member of the world community this time around. Israel wants to slow down Iranian programs so that Israel, has the time to plan and execute the most efficient and safest strike, an attack that will eliminate Iran's nuclear threat for the near and distant future. Israel is mimicking the Western world, following their lead. You might ask how, why, when did these changes in attitude in the levels of acceptance come about? The answer is that the actors on the ground changed as leadership changed, as political objectives changed, and as technology changed, and as Iran changed. Iran is more capable today than they were in 2015. They know more about nuclear fission. They know more about enrichment. They know more about bomb making and more about creating bomb delivery systems. As Iran changed, as their nuclear capabilities flourished, Israel pursued varying policies aimed at setting back their nuclear program. There were targeted assassinations of scientists, as well as targeted explosions in nuclear facilities, as well as computer viruses, all part of Israel's tool chest of smaller and larger attacks on Iran's nuclear program. And they worked. They set back Iran's nuclear progress. But they did not work well enough. They did not put a stop to Iran's nuclear development. Since 2015, there's been a significant Iranian progress in nuclear production capabilities, but they have not yet created a nuclear bomb. That is because of the Israeli campaign against the Iranian nuclear capability. So not yet, but they're still working hard on it. And Israel is the first target in their sights. The next logical question is, will Israel's lines in the sand move again? No. Unequivocally, no. There is no imaginable scenario that Israel would permit Iran to attain a nuclear bomb and delivery system. There is no Israeli leader, not on the right, the middle, or the political left, that will permit Iran to attain a nuclear bomb and delivery system. That is a fact. And when the time comes, even if the ideal plan has not yet been devised, even if the United States does not offer a nod of approval, Israel will strike Iran. Iran is hell-bent on acquiring a weapon. Israel is hell-bent on not letting that happen. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post that ran September 11th, 2022. It's written by Rabbi Yehuda Lavi. It's spelled L-A-V-E. The column is called Israel is the Land of Miracles, Compromises, and Status Quo. It's subtitled, Israeli Society Used to Rely on Compromises and the Status Quo. However, in today's media reality, the idea of winners and losers is being promoted over the idea of peaceful compromises. Lavi writes an insightful column. He begins with a quote from David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. It was one of Ben-Gurion's most favorite and famous lines. The column begins this way. In Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles, quipped David Ben-Gurion. Israel's first prime minister. Israel's return to its homeland after 2,000 years of exile, an event completely miraculous in the annals of history. As such, Israel is considered a Jewish state because we accept as proof the Hebrew Bible and the Bible promise to the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel. As such, we believe in Jewish values, such as Shabbat, as policy in Israel. But we do not force anyone to keep the Shabbat. But it is a public policy. The Jerusalem Post does not publish on Shabbat, and in many places we do not have public transportation. He continues, as that is the basis why the Jewish people are in Israel, a series of compromises allow us to live and prosper in the land. We are able to live here because the world and the United Nations split our country into an Arab and Jewish community. After this was done, on November 29, 1947, the United Nations didn't support its own resolution. And when Ben-Gurion declared the Jewish state based on this resolution, we were attacked by 6 Arab armies and were able to survive until a ceasefire was agreed upon, unquote. Lavi continues positing that Judaism and Israel are filled with compromises. He explains how that's the case. He writes, a ceasefire is a compromise. Neither party is happy, but shooting stops and the blood stops flowing. A compromise can also be considered a status quo. The Bible commands us to set up a series of courts and judges. The judges are encouraged to always have the litigants reach an independent compromise, rather than force the judges to come to a decision. The Bible, considered God's wisdom, teaches us it is better to have 2 people partially unhappy than a winner and a loser, because losers seldom give up, and so peace is not accomplished. The goal of having courts and judges is a forum to have compromise instead of bloodshed. Now Levi addresses the issue of the status quo, which is one of the ways in which Israeli society functions, the way in which law functions, actually. This is how he writes. When the state was formed, there were areas like Haifa where there was public transportation, so it was left alone. In other places, it wasn't in place, so it was kept. Keeping the status quo allows us to function even when there is no agreement. The status quo is not like the Ten Commandments, that are unchangeable, but subject to reasonable review when the basis for compromise changes. There will be a day when the trains, not the buses, which work on gas and have different halachic rules, will run without drivers and without having to break Shabbat to use them. We allow Shabbat elevators under these principles. When this happens, the issues of trains running on the Sabbath will be revisited and a new status quo may come about. Levi concludes by explaining that the Jewish people have important lessons to teach the world through these issues of compromise and status quo. He writes, "The Jewish people have something to teach the world. Our laws and ideas have provided the basis for modern civilized society. The reality is that Moses was called the lawgiver and is universally accepted in modern society as the lawgiver, which is the basis of compromise and status quo." Thank you, Rabbi Levi. This was a fun and informative column. Next up is a column by Tzipi Livni. It was written on September 6, 2022, and it was published in Ynet. The title of the column is "Israel is Ignoring the Palestinian Conflict in its Election Campaign." Opinion? Right-wing politicians, despite history advising them otherwise, are leading the country towards a binational future without a Jewish majority or democracy, while those on the center-left are too afraid to speak out as they seek a broad coalition. Livni is an experienced politician and negotiator for the peace. She has served as a member of Knesset, Israel's foreign minister, Minister of Justice, and opposition leader. When Livni speaks, we should listen. She begins this column by explaining that when it comes to Israeli elections, the issue of the Palestinians is hardly even discussed. An election is upcoming on November 1st, and this huge issue has barely been raised. She explains why. This is how she writes it. Even in this round of election campaigns, ahead of the national vote of November 1st, we have hardly heard about the most important topic for the future of Israel and its existence as a Jewish state, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The conflict has not disappeared, but it has either lost the interest of Israelis or is seen as too provocative to discuss for those who fear being branded as leftists, now a derogatory term that could distance voters. In general, throughout the last few decades, those who supported a peace process and disengagement from the Palestinians have been told to sober up. The right-wing politicians regard negotiations with Palestinians as a total disaster or even a failure, and the extreme amongst them even call terror victims victims of peace. But the reality is just the opposite. During the Gaza war in 2009, for example, while I served as Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, my political opponent at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, accused me of pushing a weak policy and that I prevented the military from completing their mission. Livni explains that the right see talks as a failure, but she believes that there is a pathway towards peace and that it requires creativity. And without that creativity, Israel will be locked in place, fossilized. My word, not hers. This is how she writes it. These are problems Israel is facing and must address with creative ideas so that a better and more secure reality can be built. Even if realistically Israel must now manage the conflict, any leader would admit that there must be a long perspective guiding that management. But in Israel's political discourse, the future of the conflict is being ignored, as well as the steps needed to be taken. Or in other words, there must be a strategy from which tactical steps are decided. Those who believe in the vision of a Jewish, democratic, and safe state of Israel understand that in order to see this through, we must maintain a Jewish majority and for that we need to disengage from the Palestinians. Our partners on the other side, although critical of any agreement, must not pervert our vision. We will be doomed if we allow Palestinian weakness or refusal to compromise to do so. Israeli-Livni explains, has fossilized the status quo and it's becoming accepted. She asserts that if it continues like this, there will be no peace and no chance to develop an agreement or even continue as a democracy. She writes, laws are already being changed and historic reality erased, as demonstrated when the Education Ministry refused to allow to use the maps that show the Green Line, the borders of the eve of the 1967 Six-Day War. By erasing the line and presenting the illusion of a single territorial bloc, Israel denies history and the legal reality between the Jordan River and the sea. This is not only a question of ignorance of young Israelis. School graduates will grow up thinking that all that belongs to them, and who then will be able to object. This is how the narrative is set, and it will certainly lead to our demise as a Jewish democratic state. Instead, Israel faces a future of being undemocratic and without a Jewish majority, which will end the vision of the founders as it was expressed in the Declaration of Independence. The process must stop now, before it's too late. Let us at least begin to honestly discuss the future. It's a very interesting piece by Tzipi Livni. Thank you so very much. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 5 cartoons and memes today. The first 3 cartoons and memes are part of a theme that I have been developing, and I will continue to develop this theme. Cartoonists are also dedicating time to the theme, as cartoonists are astute observers of our society. I know I'm in good company. The theme is agreeing to disagree and learning to discuss differences rather than turning the other side into the enemy. In this first cartoon, 2 people are fighting, each standing on what appears to be a cliff. And each one is shouting the same thing: America is divided because of you. And get closer and see what happens. In the end, they both fall off the cliff into a grave which is labeled Democracy, R.I.P., Rest in Peace. Sad but true. Next up is a meme with 2 nearly identical 2022 election buttons. One reads Ultra MAGA Semi-Fascist 2022. The second reads Immoral Un-American Open Border Socialist 2022. Almost exactly the same, just different sides. The last cartoon in this group has 2 panels. The cartoon is entitled What the Word Tolerance Means. In the top panel, a person is saying, we'll just have to agree to disagree. The next panel reads, what most people mean when they use the word tolerance. Quote, we'll just have to agree that you have to agree with me, or I'll call you intolerant. That's true. This meme is a picture of someone holding a cup of coffee. He says, I don't procrastinate. I intentionally wait until the last minute, because then I will be older and wiser. I have heard every excuse for procrastination. This one is the best. It is wonderful and very funny. And we close this part of the cartoons with a tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. It's entitled Her Final Wave. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken surprised everyone and visited Kiev recently. In Kiev, Blinken announced that the Biden administration was promising a gift of major new military aid worth more than $2.8 billion to Ukraine and other European nations that are threatened by Russia. In meetings with senior Ukrainian officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, Blinken said that the Biden administration had notified Congress of its intent to provide $2.2 billion in long-term military financing to Ukraine and 18 of its neighbors, including NATO members and regional security partners that are, quote, potentially at risk of future Russian aggression. Blinken told Zelensky that, quote, "We know this is a pivotal moment, more than 6 months into Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, as your counteroffensive is now underway and proving effective." Zelensky replied with, "We are grateful for this signal, for this enormous support that you're providing on a day-to-day basis." Turkey has begun to reassess its role in the war against terror. Turkish leadership has decided to crack down on the terrorists that have been freely roaming throughout their country, and they're organizing right under the noses of the Turks. Once that decision was made, Turkish police took action and captured senior Islamic State ISIS leader Bashar Khattab Ghazal al-Sumadai. That news was released by President Tayyip Erdogan, released himself, and he was quoted in the state-owned Anadolu news agency. He was returning from a trip from the Balkans. President Erdogan spoke to journalists and informed them that the militant terrorist, codenamed Abu Zaid, was captured in an operation carried out by Turkey's police and Turkey's intelligence agency. Erdogan said that the terrorist was transferred to judicial authorities and placed in prison in Turkey after interrogation by police and intelligence personnel. This is a long-awaited and major step forward for Turkey. Albania was the target of a major cyber attack. The Albanian government's computer system was targeted by malicious cyber attacks, and it was Iran that was behind the attack. In response, the United States government imposed sanctions on Iran's intelligence agency and its leadership. The U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control designated Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security and Ismail Khatib, who heads the ministry, as terror actors responsible for cyber-related activities against the United States and its allies. Albania, a NATO member, cut diplomatic ties with Iran and expelled all Iranian embassy staff because of this cyber attack. It was the first known case of a country cutting diplomatic relations over cyber attacks. Brian Nelson, the U.S. Treasury Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, issued a statement that read, "Iran's cyber attack against Albania disregards norms of responsible peacetime state behavior in cyberspace." Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard has hijacked a foreign ship in the Persian Gulf for allegedly smuggling 757,000 liters of diesel out of Iran. That news comes to us via IRNA, the Iranian state news agency. IRNA reported that the unnamed vessel, the 7 crew members, all foreign nationals, have been handed over to Iranian legal authorities. The news agency did not release the nationality of the ship or the nationalities of the crew members. Iran, which has some of the world's cheapest fuel prices due to heavy subsidies and the plunge in value of its national currency, has been fighting rampant fuel smuggling, both by land to neighboring countries and by sea to Gulf Arab states. The guards have detained several ships in the last few months for smuggling fuel in the Gulf. This hijacking indicates a serious development in terms of Iran. Iran wants everyone to know that they are totally in control of the export of their fuel. Only they can break the embargo, not private companies, not investors, not pirates. There has been tension and even murderous violence between Palestinian factions for decades. Palestinian faction band together only to break up again. Algeria announced that it will mediate talks between Hamas and Fatah in a bid to mend the long, fraught ties between the two most prominent of the Palestinian factions. According to Lebanese media, the Palestinians said that Algeria approached both Hamas and Fatah, and they all agreed that Algeria will host peace talks. They will most likely come to an agreement, but as always, it is unlikely that any agreement they do come to will last. It will collapse after a few short weeks. Shin Bet director Ronen Bar offered a prediction and assessment of the direction of Israel's safety and security. Director Bar explained that Israel's political instability and social tensions may encourage terror groups and enemy states. According to Bar, Weakening of the Palestinian Authority would require security policy changes and new civil reforms alongside Fatah. Even the Palestinian public supports this move. But you need two for tango. In other words, while there is Palestinian popular support, and while Israelis understand that it takes two to tango, and that the Palestinian leadership is their dance partner, Palestinian leadership has absolutely no interest in dancing with Israel. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one picante piece of information. The theme I've been developing is really the theme of mutual respect. Mutual respect is both a biblical and rabbinic concept. Kavod means respect in Hebrew, but Tselem Elohim means in God's image. It means that we were created, as it is stated in Genesis, in God's image. The Bible commands us to respect, to love, and to have awe in God. The rabbis explained that there is God in all of us and in all God's creations. Mutual respect is a fundamental concept in Judaism. That is the case regardless of our differences, even our differing political points of view. We will gain much more, benefit much more from one another when we learn to respect, to pay kavod to those people with whom we disagree. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.